Welcome to The Nation, I'm Jason Wee. As AI continues to transform industries, it is also driving a sharp rise in global energy demand. Around the world, countries are rethinking about how they generate reliable, low-carbon electricity to power the technologies of the future. And with that begs the question, could nuclear energy be the answer? Joining me to discuss the opportunities, challenges, and what nuclear energy could mean for the country are Nur ZAFIRAH, Senior Manager, Capital Projects and Infrastructure Advisory at PwC Malaysia, and AZEEM BAKAR, Managing Director of Free Malaysia Today. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Now, ZAFIRAH, I want to start with you. So, Malaysia has committed to becoming an AI nation by 2030. What does that actually require in terms of energy, and is our grid currently built for it?
Yeah, Jason, an AI nation ambition underneath the surface is really a physical infrastructure story. The clusters of data center campuses by hyperscalers are sized to the hundreds of megawatts to multiple gigawatts, right? And what's different about them versus your ordinary industrial load is really the reliability bar. These data center campuses require 99.99% of uptime. And what that really means is continuous baseload power, right? And Malaysia is already starting to feel this. Recent projections show that by 2035, the total energy demand expected from data centers is meant to increase to 34 gigawatts, right? And that's equivalent to 1/3 of the total energy demand, up from just 7% this year. And so we built our grid for a Malaysia that was not used to this kind of always-on digital demand. And so becoming a genuine AI nation would then require us to build a power system that can commit and promise to deliver this always-on demand, right? And that means moving towards increased investments in grid infrastructure as well as varying sources of energy. We've seen this in an example where the government has just approved 42 billion ringgit of total capital expenditure to TNB in order for them to carry out the grid infrastructure upgrades required in the next 2 years. And that's precisely the kind of investments that would be required in order for the energy system to support this genuine AI nation ambition for Malaysia.
AZEEM, let's turn to you. What are your thoughts about our ambition to become an AI nation by 2030? Are our resources getting ready to get there?
Thank you, Jason. First, when we talk about AI and nuclear, let's have a clarity here. The clarity, the vision of this country to become an AI nation by 2030. What does an AI nation mean? It means two things. Number one is a nation that is powered by AI. Number two, a nation that has an AI ecosystem, a sovereign AI ecosystem. As a nation that wants to become AI powered, we will need energy, right? And an AI, what does an AI future look like? The nation will be powered by something called AI brains, where AI absorbs all the information, they become a knowledge base, and this AI brain will then have agents that can automate your work. And this AI brain is going to power companies and even nations one day. And that would mean almost like an AI on steroids here. In order to create that kind of future, and do we want to create that kind of future? We have no choice, because at the rate we are going with AI advancement, countries or companies that are adopting AI are finding themselves more productive. And if we do not keep up or in fact adapt, we will get left behind. When we get left behind, other countries, other companies in the world powered by AI are more productive. We get left behind. So we have no choice. So we got to be an AI nation. It's not just a buzzword. As what ZAFIRAH mentioned, to realize that vision, we don't have enough. It's as simple as that. So we have a target of maybe 97 gigawatts by 2050. We are now at about 46. Right? That's a 50 gigawatt gap. That is equivalent to about 7 or 8 nuclear plants actually. Now they want to bridge the gap within solar, but there are issues with solar energy. There's not enough land for solar. Other renewable sources like wind, we don't have enough wind. We are relying on coal, but currently we are importing a lot of coal from Indonesia. We depend on another country for our energy. What about hydro? Hydro, we don't have enough streams in Peninsula and Sabah. only Sarawak has enough streams for hydro. So where else can we go?
Right. So before we get there, I want to talk about this gap a bit more. So Zafirah, you know, we talk about AI on steroids, and one of the statistics I read is that the government's own projection says that data centers will go from 7% of national electricity consumption this year to 31% by 2035. Do you think this trajectory is manageable, or can you paint the demand and supply picture in perspective for our viewers today?
Sure, and this would illustrate Azeem's point further. So essentially, the latest analysis by ICIS Malaysia Research Institute is perhaps the best anchor for this picture. So on the demand side, right, I think in 2022, we used up about 194 terawatt hours of electricity. And if nothing unusual happens, you know, we progress modestly, that amount is only supposed to increase incrementally by 2050. But when you add in data centers, like you've mentioned, Jason, when you add in increased electrification from EVs and more electrification of the industries, that number could triple by 2050. That's on the demand side. On the supply side, the National Energy Transition Roadmap wants to increase the total installed capacity considerably by 2050, of which 70% is meant to come from renewables, and solar is doing the heavy lifting of that, right? But you have to remember that solar panels only produce electricity when the sun is shining. So what that means is, in a heavy solar system, it's only going to produce a fraction of the rated capacity, as opposed to, say, for example, nuclear, that can produce near to its full capacity all around the clock. And so when you put those two sides together, right, the increase of demand from data centers and electrification versus the supply, the actual usable supply, you get a meaningful gap by 2050. And the gap we're looking at right now is close to 50%, around 30 gigawatts of gap that is not accounted for yet. So the question is, what would be a realistic source of energy that can fill that gap, right? Azeem mentioned that we don't have wind in Malaysia. We're phasing out of coal. Oil and gas production in Malaysia itself is depleting. Therefore, we're importing more from outside. And so realistically, the one tool in the toolbox that can help to fill up that gap is really nuclear energy, right? And it's not instead of renewables, it's really as the steady backbone that would allow other sources of energy, even solar, or even to power the data centers, to be able to do so in a reliable manner. And I think that's why the government has also started looking into nuclear again as a potential source of energy.
So before we get into the policy technicals, I want to take a step back and turn to you, Azeem, because this is not the first time that Malaysia has attempted our journey at nuclear, right? We set up a steering committee in 2008, we established the first Malaysian Nuclear Power Corporation in 2011, and then scrapped the whole program in 2018. What has changed between then and now that we are trying to bring nuclear back from the dead, especially for viewers who perhaps hold nuclear like a dirty word? I think many of us associate it with the radiotoxic elements and perhaps potential effects on the rakyat. Why is it so critical now?
Because of AI. Previously, we didn't have that, so they could afford to delay it. But suddenly in 2022, the surge of AI usage also warranted more electricity. So that is what changed. So from electricity demand going like that, suddenly it surged like that, right? So that is what catalyzes, I would say, the powers that be into taking this a lot more seriously now. That's number one. Number two, you talking about perception.
Yep.
So as a media company, of course, we need to understand the pros and cons of nuclear energy. Of course, throughout the world, nuclear energy has a bad rep. But I've had experience of going to Russia myself, visit a nuclear plant under a press tour. But I want to share with you an experience which I had, which I find interesting, was that when it comes to safety, I was in the hall where they were giving nuclear briefing, and there was a question from a journalist from Southeast Asia asking about safety, right? Then I think it was IAEA at the time, they responded, say, we have moved away from that. Nuclear is safe. Of course, there are some incidents, Chernobyl, Fukushima,
Japan, right?
But statistically, it's very small compared to the success of it, right? There are hundreds of nuclear plants around the world. So that question came from South Asia. But whereas when journalists from say Egypt or India, they ask more technological related question.
Right.
So the awareness of nuclear, I think, is quite lacking here, and that perception can be addressed with greater understanding, greater visibility, and public education.
Right. So we are already in the process of consideration, right? And Malaysia is formally endorsing nuclear feasibility study. But really, for Zafirah, and turn to you, for viewers hearing this for the first time, because it certainly is my first time hearing about this as well, where are we in the process currently, and what does a formal decision look like when it comes to proceeding with such a huge decision for the country?
Sure. So in November 2024, the Cabinet and Majlis Tenaga Negara, chaired by the Prime Minister himself, formally endorsed including nuclear power into Rancangan Malaysia ke-13 RMK13. And on the back of that, My Power Corporation, it's a government agency under Ministry of Energy Transition and Water Transformation, Petra, was formally designated as what we call the Nuclear Energy Program Implementing Organization. It's a bit of a mouthful, but NEPIO in short, as the NEPIO, right? And that's an important designation because the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, that is the international standard setter for civilian nuclear programs around the world, require that NEPIO to exist and function before any country can be considered seriously in its phase milestones approach. So concretely, where we are in that process is what IAEA calls phase 1. The pre-decision phase, right? Working towards milestone 1, which is the readiness to commit. And so in practical terms, what that means is My Power is currently running the national feasibility studies on all 19 infrastructure issues, ranging from regulatory and legal frameworks to nuclear safety, to siting, to financial capability. And because in IAEA terms, what it means to proceed isn't a press statement. It's actually the Cabinet making a documented policy commitment following the feasibility studies, which then opens us to phase 2, where we select developer operator, technology vendor selection, and all of that things, right? And then on the atomic regulation side specifically, Malaysia also just passed the Atomic Energy Licensing Act, Amendment Act in 2025, with phase enforcement. And that is exactly the kind of the building block towards an independent regulatory muscle that the industry will eventually want to see. So essentially, Malaysia is following very closely the IAEA's milestones approach in our journey of launching our own nuclear energy program to ensure that we make fully informed decisions every step of the way.
Right. And I think it looks like, based on what you're saying here, that nuclear seems to be getting consensus across both administrative and political boards. But we are also hearing from a few dissenting voices. I mean, the anti-nuclear bloc, I mean, we have various groups and NGOs, such as Sahabat Alam, the Malaysian Coalition Against Nuclear. Their arguments anchor, for example, in the Bukit Merah legacy and waste management issues with nuclear waste. Azeem, for you, how do you think the government should be communicating about nuclear? Is it getting it right now? Or how should the government be prepared to perception manage as we go deeper into these decisions?
Usually, to do this, the number one leader, the Prime Minister, needs to tell the nation that whether we need it or we don't need it.
Right.
When looking at the government policy today, it points to that we need it. It has to come from the top, because the top knows what's happening, what kind of energy need that has to, how much energy we need. Once we have that clarity, then we get to explain, okay, this is the gap. If we don't do this, what will happen? We can either choose to be an AI nation and be ahead of the curve, and make sure the country is productive and create jobs, or we don't. And then, if we do not have enough energy, what will happen? Maybe one day we will have to ration, or maybe the electricity cost would increase because there's not enough electricity. So there are these trade-offs. So at the very top, the leadership must be very clear in the vision of the country and the gaps that we have, so that everybody, including the civil society, can understand. Then they won't we will be able to argue based on facts. So different civil society groups will then be able to engage. Okay, fine, we need it. Now let's look at the implementation. So you mentioned about implementation. Maybe there are governance issues we have to address, and that's when the government policymakers will have to decide on how to strengthen government processes, and then that's how we then break down the problems. From one problem we break it down and then get everybody to engage throughout the entire I would say stakeholder network. And then once everybody can understand that we need it, and this is how we're going to do it, this is how we're going to do strengthen the governance, then the communication is to the public. Then the media comes in to be able to explain, okay, whether we need it, this is what it takes. Then you have forces within the parliament, you have the opposition who will then argue based on mechanism, perhaps not the why. So argue whether we have the systems in place, the safety measures in place. Then that is how we constructively execute this policy.
So I want to get into implementation now, because I think let's not jump the gun and assume questions of governance, which are important, but I think one of the first few questions we need to ask is, can we do it? Now, Zafirah, one of the concerns with nuclear is that it's famously capital intense, especially to build a nuclear plant. For Malaysians who might be concerned about who pays for a Malaysia nuclear plant, what's the financing model behind that, given that Malaysia perhaps is in a weaker fiscal position?
Yeah. So there is a well-established spectrum of nuclear financing models that we've seen globally, right? On one end, you have the fully government-owned model, as we've seen in India's MPCIL in Kudankulam, or Pakistan's PAC operated plants, where the state plays a central role in financing, operating, owning those plants as strategic national infrastructure, oftentimes with sovereign-backed supplier credit. That's one. On the other end is a more commercially structured model with guaranteed offtakes, closer to what the UK has done for their Hinkley Point C, where private developers and investors build and operate the plant under a government-backed contract for difference, where they fix the electricity prices for decades, right? And in between, you have the bilateral government-to-government model with concessional financing, which is exactly what Bangladesh used for its Raipur plant. It's a project that cost $13 billion US, 90% of it financed by Russian sovereign-backed export credit loan. A purely state-funded model, I think, is quite difficult for Malaysia, because the scale that we talked about, we need probably at least 10 gigawatts of nuclear to realistically fill up the gap, would run into the tens of billions of dollars. So to put that entirely on a federal balance sheet alongside our development priorities would be unrealistic. But neither is a purely private sector model, because typically private capital won't move first on a technology with no domestic operating track record. So then what would be most realistic for Malaysia is perhaps a hybrid model, right? And this is where government is the anchor shareholder or guarantor, combined with long-term offtake arrangements, export credit supplies support from the vendor country, as well as potentially multilateral development banks or organizations participating where possible. So
it's clear that we cannot go at this alone, right? We are not going to only have the Malaysian state government, or federal or state going at it alone. And so we also need the expertise to come in and bring in the nuclear technology. But that also comes with its geopolitical entanglement. AZEEM, the shortlisted vendors that we have when it comes to bringing up a nuclear plant, Westinghouse, Capco, EDF, Rosatom, each come with a flag attached to it. How should Malaysia be thinking about vendor selection here? Should we think about it as a foreign policy question and perhaps not just a technical one?
The short answer is we need to prioritize sovereignty. No matter who we bring in, we must retain for sovereignty, so that we have energy security. That means in no way can Malaysia be subject to certain regulation or condition that tie us to a point where our energy security is compromised. That's number one. Number two, Malaysia, being non-aligned, has a policy of being able to be friendly with all parties, and even in the way we do business, we are friendly with all nations. And that geopolitical balancing is really key. Of course, up to the experts down the line when we have the supply chain, we'll be able to make sure that the balance between having which nation handles what. That is crucial. The next thing that is also crucial is technology transfer and knowledge transfer. When we do partner with these nations that provide the technology, we must be able to learn from them so that one day we can do it ourselves. Because nuclear energy and nuclear technology is a very long-term game. One nuclear plant can last 100 years. That's 3 generations of engineering jobs. So we must be able to not only learn how to manage the plant, we must eventually know how to build one eventually. So energy security is of paramount importance. Non-aligned, we have to balance carefully.
So for the both of you, if we do get this right, say we have nuclear that's online by 2040s, we have sovereignty in managing our electrical grid and sources, what does it actually unlock for the country, especially for the average person? ZAFIRAH, let's start with you.
Sure. I think the economic case has at least 3 distinct layers. The first is industrial decarbonization. Nuclear has almost near zero marginal cost after capital is recovered, because the fuel cost is only about 5% of the total lifetime cost, compared to 40 to 60% in gas or 30 to 40% in coal. So what that gives is energy intensive Malaysian industries like petrochemicals, steel and cement now would have durable low carbon power that solar and storage cannot currently deliver at the required scale. And this matters directly to our export competitiveness, because a lot of trading partners are now starting to put in carbon border measures. Secondly, AI infrastructure credibility. Hyperscalers choosing where to locate the next generation of data centers are explicitly screening for firm and clean power, right? And so a country that can show that they have solved the baseload power becomes a more credible AI infrastructure destination.
AZEEM, how about you? What does it unlock for our country?
Jobs. Jobs not just from the, nuclear industry itself. Because it's 100 years, 3 generations of jobs, and jobs not just any engineering. It's from the people who are in supplying the materials, even comms, and in, for example, in countries that have nuclear energy, even the education system actually teaches the kids down to the kindergarten about nuclear energy actually. So it is a whole spectrum, a very wide spectrum of job opportunities, different types. But that is just nuclear, right? And what ZAFIRAH mentioned was right. With more energy, it unlocks more sectors, especially AI. AI is definitely something we cannot run away from. And once we are, we are able to power the nation, and hopefully we get better quality, more high-income jobs eventually. It's a high-tech industry after all.
I think it's very clear that in order to move forward, our current grid isn't enough and we just need another option, and nuclear seems to be it. Thank you both for joining us on the show today. And as Malaysia prepares for a more digital and energy-intensive future, conversations around the country's energy mix are becoming increasingly important. Whether nuclear becomes part of that future or not, the choices are made today that will help shape Malaysia's long-term energy security and economic competitiveness. I'm Jason Wee, this has been The Nation. Thank you for watching, and join us again for more in-depth conversations on topics that matter.